Hey, Chargers fans, welcome into the Guilty as Charged podcast. My name is Steven. I'm your host. Got a fun show planned for you guys. Going to have a great interview with Brendan Sonone later on in the episode. I was able to chat with him about the two players from Florida State. Technically, Trey McKitty did play at Florida State as well. So talking to him about Asante Samuel Jr. and Trey McKitty. And then we're kind of just going to go over some of the remnants from the draft, kind of some of the takeaways that we've been able to have from, kind of sitting on the draft, and then, just getting into some general takes of things we got right, things we got wrong, in terms of, the league in general. So we'll get all of that started. But first and foremost, my guys here, Tyler and Alex. Tyler, we'll start with you. How are you doing today, man?
I'm doing very, very well, but I really have this itch to just swear throughout this entire podcast. Don't quite know why, but I'm feeling it. I'll try to keep it at bay, though.
I appreciate that. Alex, how are you doing today, dude?
Doing pretty fucking good today. But it's a pretty good day, and just excited to start the show.
Well done, sir. Well done. So first and foremost, we do have some unfortunate news to talk about, and that is Casey Hayward signing with the Las Vegas Raiders, much to the chagrin of everyone on Chargers Twitter. It was kind of predictable, right? Once Gus Bradley left there, we kind of assumed that, some of the former Chargers players would go there. They reportedly went after Rayshon Jenkins, and then Rayshon ended up getting a huge bag from the Jacksonville Jaguars. So right now it looks like they just have Casey Hayward, but Alex, what's your kind of takeaway from the Raiders signing Casey Hayward?
I mean, it makes a lot of sense for them. Casey Hayward might be their best corner right now at this current moment. Trayvon Mullen has shown moments of kind of development. He had a good September, but then kind of fell off the rest of the year. And Damon Arnett, who was their first round pick in 2020, is currently kind of unplayable. So they want some more development out of him. They bring in Hayward to kind of stabilize the group, pretty much be a bridge corner. I wasn't too surprised by Casey's decision to go there, and also the familiarity with Gus Bradley, of course. As for how much better it makes them, I don't feel like it makes that much better, just because, Casey had a rough year last year, and usually when corners hit that bad season after 30, they don't usually have a rebound year. I wouldn't say that it's impossible, because Hayward was hurt last year, and maybe this year he's luckier with his health, but I think it's more of a stabilizing move for the Raiders than it is ceiling raising move for the secondary.
Amazing how fast their secondary has potentially, we don't know how the rookies will be, has started to turn over. Before it was certainly a weakness. I still think it's a weakness. But, if you want to be Gus Bradley and only rush 4, which he's going to try to do despite their personnel, at least have some good guys on the back end. And, a guy, like you said, is probably their best, DB on the team. I like Merrick a lot, but I want to see what he does on the field first.
Right.
So it's a good spot for him. A lot of fans are bagging on him for his picture where he looked miserable. I personally didn't think he looked miserable. I just thought he was trying to make I look like hot shit face, and it just looked like he was kind of like he's not good at it,
So just poorly executed picture.
Poorly executed, yeah. I think he legitimately did not try to look like, super miserable, but no one really looks good in silver and black anyway.
That is true. That is 100% true. It's definitely a little disappointing. But, I think obviously players they don't look at rivalries the same way that we do, right? And so Casey's looking at this as kind of his last hurrah. He gets to reunite with Ron Miles rather, and Gus Bradley, coaches who he's very familiar with, and have done a lot for his career. So it sucks. I'm not going to wish him well, but I'm not going to root against him either. There was a lot of I can't wait to see Jalen Guyton burn him. And it's okay, that's a little, I'm not vibing with that one. I definitely don't want to see him have his best game against the Chargers, but I'm definitely not rooting for him to fail miserably against the Chargers either. So, kind of an expected move once everything kind of settled. They apparently were trying to figure out if they could get Richard Sherman first, and then settled on Casey Hayward. So we'll have to see, but I'm not super worried about it, like Alex was saying.
And neither are we.
Cool. So the other thing that I kind of wanted to talk about today before we get into some of the other stuff, I did go back and watch some tape on Chris Rumph from his 2019 season. And I no longer think that that was the worst pick of the Chargers draft. And, watching that tape, I can see some traits, some workability that Brandon Staley could look at and say, all right, I can work with this. I can, maybe mold him into something, beyond that. But I'm still concerned. Like I'm not going to get to the point where, I'm going to outright praise the pick as like my favorite day 3 pick or somebody that I think is going to have, an instant impact. But I can see some traits, some workability. And so I just wanted to clarify that. I know I was kind of hard on the pick last time or on our last episode. So I just wanted to clarify. I no longer think that it was the worst pick of the draft. But I am still, a little concerned with what they're getting in terms of, the lack of strength of the power of attack and the lack of bend around the corners. But like I said, I'm a little more on board than I was last time.
I see.
Okay, yeah, Rumph, very cool. Now, what do you think is the worst pick of the draft?
Well, it's a tough question, right? Because I really like the player, but to me, it has to be Trey McKitty, because I think the value at that point is the worst value of the draft. And I'm not as low on Larry Roundtree as Alex is. I actually do really like him there, and it's a 6-run running back, so who freaking cares at that point? But Trey McKitty really.
Can we talk about how Brandon Staley said he wanted to pick him earlier? Because that reminded me of Anthony Lynn saying he wanted to take Joshua Kelly in the 3rd round.
Yeah.
Not to say that, Staley's going to be Lynn, but, the whole overvaluing running backs thing is a tad concerning.
Yeah, that was a little concerning. But yeah, just from a value standpoint, I think it has to be Trey McKitty, unfortunately, because I do really like the player. But it just kind of seems like, looking back on it, that they had their eye on Tommy Tremble. And then Tommy Tremble went, I think it was like 7 picks before them. And then it was like, oh shit, we got to grab our blocking tight end. So that's just kind of my perception of it. But again, I do really like the player.
I mean, I still think Roundtree is the worst pick of the draft. But then you say it's a 6th-round guy and it was your second 6th-round pick. So I guess it is McKitty. As far as Rumph goes, such a hard one. I've never found a player that I think is just so difficult. Maybe because he's on the Chargers now and I really have to think about it. Yeah. Whereas Sean Wade, it's like great 2019, horrendous 2020. Therefore, I can just be like, I don't like him. But now Rumph is on the team, so I'm trying to think of what he does well. Personally, I see what he did well in 2019, and he does that in 2020. He's a good inside pass rusher, either as an edge guy working inside against a tackle or standing up and working against a guard and rushing on the inside. But he still isn't good against the run in that UNC game. He still gets blown off the ball in that game. He doesn't really have a whole lot of pass rush arsenal on the outside. So the concerns are definitely still there. And then, spoiler alert for the video breakdown I'm going to do, between his reps against Banks, Eichenberg, and Darisaw, I think he won 1 rep out of 30.
Yeah.
So and those are guys that are draftable and good tackles or guards. So we'll see about him. But yeah, definitely not the worst pick in the draft. Congratulations on watching film, being mature about it, and being able to change your stance on these things. That's more than I can say about most of Chargers Twitter.
Thank you. I will say, he's, aside from the strength and the frame, which he definitely has to fill into, I never saw any kind of counters towards the outside from him. And every single time he tries to rush and counter towards the inside, and that's not going to fly in the NFL. That's not going to fly when you're trying to counter inside and there's Quentin Nelson. So, as Melvin Ingram found out, a couple of years ago. So, or even, going up against someone like Creed Humphrey, that's not going to fly. Landon Dickerson. So him trying to counter inside every single time is not going to go very well for him. So like I said, I still don't see a super bendy, twitchy athlete. He's going to have to figure out how to make an impact on the outside. He's not going to be able to rush against guards every single rep like Duke had him doing against North Carolina, which was fun. It was entertaining, but it was also infuriating because I'm like, I want to see this edge rusher rush from the edge. Stop having him rush against the guards. So there's definitely a lot of things that he's going to have to work on. But, we said on Sunday, you see glimpses of it. And I think in 2019, the glimpses are more frequent. And so that's kind of my thought process is here is I'm like, okay, I can see more of things happening, which is weird because he was more productive in 2020. But, you know, Tyler and I were having this conversation. A lot of his production in 2020 was, you know, rushing against guards and doing stunts where he's looping from one guard all the way around to the opposite side. So there, like I said, there's definitely a little more upside there than I initially thought. But I'm still a little concerned. They're still not ready to, like, you know, if he's playing 20 snaps a game, I'm concerned. But if he's playing 5-6 snaps as a rotational pass rusher, playing on special teams as a rookie, developing, filling out his frame, then I think that's okay.
I just wonder how much, when we look at like this college season in general, of these players were affected by, like, is the season happening? Is it not happening? Both mentally, physically, right? You know, like, I mean, the Pac-12 really didn't know what was happening till the buzzer. The SEC and ACC were sort of like always kind of going on, but then, you know, they canceled and didn't, you know, whatever. But so I don't know. I wonder about that, looking at like a player's performance declining when we talk about like Shaun Wade, like Tyler mentioned, or potentially Chris Rumph. Like that's something that just sticks in my mind.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, we'll have to ask, like, I don't know, like, you've got to ask these players if they really felt like they were affected by it or not. So interesting thing to keep an eye on. The other thing we wanted to talk about before getting into this interview is just kind of, you know, we did our draft grades, right? And all three of us gave an A- to the Chargers, and they're getting a lot of praise for what they did this weekend. And I think, you know, there is definitely some frustration on Chargers Twitter about, you know, the day 3 picks. And, you know, we are all kind of in agreement about at least, you know, the Roundtree pick not making a whole lot of sense. But you look at, you know, Pro Football Focus giving the Chargers like the 3rd best draft overall, and like CBS Sports is like the 4th, and Mel Kiper gave them an A. So it's a little interesting that like there's this outside perception of the Chargers nailed it, the Chargers did awesome, and then you log on to Twitter, you search, you know, Dan Wolkenstein, you pull up that thread, and everybody's just banging on the Chargers picks on Chargers Twitter. So I guess, you know, Tyler, what's your kind of takeaway of the thought process of, you know, nationally it looks great, and then on Chargers Twitter, you know, there's a lot of mixed emotions there?
I think I would have been part of that crowd, honestly. That was a little bit on the more negative side in years past. I know, like, we're covering them on Bolt Beat and now here, like, you've had to do a little bit more homework, so you're able to kind of like settle down, don't react to the pick immediately, and figure things out. But, you know, I think I would have been negative on it, but I'm being completely honest. Like, your perspective on someone like Brendan Hymas or Josh Palmer or Nick Neiman, you know, some of these guys, and even Trey McKitty, you know, whether we talk about it on the podcast or not, or on Twitter or not, I'm pretty sure that the three of us have DM'd about pretty much every player that we could possibly think of that the Chargers could take, might fit here, whatever. You know, so interacting with you guys, and all three of us have watched a certain amount of players. But, you know, Steven had, you know, the Palmer and McKitty thing a little bit more, I think. That makes me, I think, a little bit more positive. So I think, you know, based on, okay, so like that thread was wild to me because I saw, like, to me, I was more measured with the picks because you had talked about these players, and, you know, and of course Brendan Thorne talks about, you know, Hymas, and it's like, okay, I'm going to trust these opinions, and that's why I think these picks are okay. But it seemed like for a while there that fans were like, okay, I don't know who this person is, so I don't like them. But then, like, the next morning, everyone's going, I've kind of softened on this a little bit. I've kind of grown to like these picks because I get it. Maybe it's not the best player. Maybe it's not the safety that they needed, but I like the player, and Staley wanted him, and Staley has a vision. You hear it through Telesco, through Staley, you know, through the interviews or whatever. You know, Staley had a vision for he wanted these guys. So I think people are starting to warm up to that. But as far as that thread went, I don't know what happened, because even the thread question is just, you know, do you like the draft overall? And people are like, no, I don't like their third round, you know, third round pick. And it's like, I don't think you kind of missed the whole point of the thing. So it is a little bit, it is a little bit wild. I don't know. Maybe there's a more vocal majority that I completely missed the first time around, but it seems like people were down and then they're back up. And then based on that thread, we're kind of somewhere in the middle now. So not really sure what's going on.
Yeah. I think the thing is that you just can't weigh every pick evenly. Like, you can't just put,
Right.
you know, Rashawn Slater, you know, all the way down to Mark Webb and just weigh all those picks evenly, because, they're not all equally important. And that's why I think you see some of the national media be like, well, they got Rashawn Slater. They answered their question at left tackle. They, got Asante Samuel. They answered their question at cornerback. And then after that point, a lot of it is about depth. So, you may get an analyst that's like, I don't know about Chris Rumph, but,
Sure.
they nailed, everything else in those first 3 rounds. Right. So that I think is part of it. Whereas, Chargers fans in comparison are more, I guess they might be more entitled to just be like, oh, well, I like this pick, don't like this pick. Right. And I'm guilty of that too. I mean, I was kind of doing that on Saturday, to be fully honest, when it just came to day 3. And I think with more casual fans, there definitely is like, well, I know this player and I don't know this player. So therefore that this pick is bad, right? Versus, how many of us knew who, Antonio Gates was as an undrafted free agent who played basketball, right? And then he turns out to be an all-time great, right? So I do think there just is like, well, everybody's watched maybe, I don't know if everybody's watched, but everybody's heard of like probably 100 different guys. And then if, in the field of 250, if they take a guy that you're not familiar with, then the instant reaction is to be sort of negative about it. So I definitely think that plays into it when we talk about like Chargers Twitter or something. But no, as far as the national media, I mean, I think the national media just looks at it as they filled all their major needs. They got the players they wanted. And, that's kind of it. That kind of is what it is. I think they were 3rd on Dane Brugler's, like, combination of all of the grades. And I think that makes sense. I gave them an A-. And despite not liking all of their day 3 picks, like we talked about, like they just did such a great job on day 1 and 2. And, the day 3 picks matter less. Right. So that's where I see the side of the national media. But I also do see the side of Chargers Twitter of not loving every day 3 pick for sure.
Yeah, I think it's definitely normal to criticize what the Chargers have done, and we've been able to have that kind of balance, where we talk about Rashawn Slater and Asante Samuel Jr., but then we also take a step back and criticize some of the other picks. And I think it's normal that you don't love every pick, especially when you have 9 draft picks. And so
right.
You're going to get an Alohi Gilman and a Larry Roundtree essentially every single draft, just because of the sheer volume of players that are entering the league. So I think it's totally normal to say, hey, I don't like this pick. I don't get it. Obviously all 3 of us talked about our least favorite picks, but like Alex said, it's tough for me to sit back and look at someone and say, I hated their Larry Roundtree pick, so I hate the draft as a whole. And it's like, well, there were 8 other picks. Like, you've got to be able to have that balance. And, I think a lot of teams approach the draft very differently on day 3, where some teams will try and take a swing on someone like Trey Smith, right? Who carries this huge medical risk, but the talent is so high. Other teams like the Chargers will target players who they know that can contribute on special teams. And if they develop into more than that, great. If not, they're a 7th round pick, they're a 6th round pick. And so Alex kind of pointed it out that, the 2017 draft class for the Chargers, you have Mike Williams and you have Rayshawn Jenkins, who are getting extensions or, are going to be able to have long-term futures. But then you have a guy like Sam Tevi that's, on a different team, and Isaac Rochelle that's on a different team, and they signed a 1-year deal. So the reality of the NFL is that most of these day 3 picks are probably not getting second contracts. And so if you get some special teams value from them, if you do hit on them, then it turns into a great pick.
Right. And, people talk about like the concept of bad drafts too. Like, oh, well, the 2017 draft is explainable because Telesco is a bad drafter. But I also link that Chiefs one from 2017, where they have Mahomes, they have Tanoa Paseno, and they have Kareem Hunt in the first 3 rounds. And it's like they nailed it. But, Kareem Hunt, for not off the field reasons, is on a different team. Tanoa Paseno signed with the Saints. And 3 of the other guys that they took aren't in the league anymore. And Mahomes, it's a win because they took Mahomes and he's the best quarterback in the NFL. So I think there's that part of it. As far as like the draft picks and liking them kind of thing, like I don't expect to like every draft pick. I'm not Tom Telesco and I'm not Brandon Staley. Like, unless I'm running the team, I'm not going to like every draft pick. And if I ran a team, it would probably be trash. I would probably take a receiver in the second round and go crazy with it.
Bro, you would have taken Hamza Nasruddin at 90. You would have taken Hamza at 77, bro.
Yeah, I probably would have. And point that, like, I just don't think anyone is like above criticism either, because a lot of people in the YouTube comments of our last video were like, oh, well, you gotta, get time for the Staley vision and it's too early to criticize them. It's like, nah, like, I knew Trey Pipkins was a bad pick at the time and I'm gonna criticize them when they make a bad pick now. Like, I don't care if you're Tom Telesco or you're Bill Belichick. Like, if I like something, I like something, and if I don't like something, I'm gonna criticize it. Bill Belichick pulled one of his best cornerbacks off the field in the Super Bowl, and also doesn't know how to draft a receiver. So to me, no one is above criticism, but also, we shouldn't short people of praise just because, Asante Samuel Jr. fell into their lap, or Rashawn Slater fell into their lap,
Yeah.
Any other thoughts there, Tyler?
No, not really.
Okay. I think the bottom line, though, like we talked about last time, if Rashawn Slater and Asante Samuel Jr. turn out to be the kind of players that we all believe that they can be, then people are going to look back on this draft and be like, damn, they got a true cornerback one, they got a franchise left tackle. And if that's the case, then that's an A+ draft. And that's that's all everybody's going to remember. So we're going to get to this interview right now with Brendan Sonone from 247 Sports, Knowles 247. Had a great conversation with him about Asante Samuel Jr. and Trey McKitty. So as always, if you're watching us on YouTube, that's going to be in a different clip. If you're listening to this on a podcast platform, that's going to start right now. All right. So thanks again to Brendan for taking the time out to join us. Some great nuggets there, including Trey McKitty has a pilot's license. I think these college reporters have such a great insight into these players. They get to know them really well. And so I think having these kind of conversations is just so beneficial to all of our listeners and to us, because we get to learn more about them without being able to speak to them.
Yeah, and I think one of the early interviews that you did, I think Jason was there too, but at least you, was Yogi Roth about this Justin Herbert kid. And I think, some of the questions that people had about his leadership and what kind of guy he was were really answered by Yogi Roth in that interview. And of course, now you see that those issues were non-issues.
Yeah.
So having that kind of insight with these guys who know them really well is really, really cool. So I love interviews like this for sure.
All right. So we're going to move on now to just some kind of general takeaways from the draft, aside from the Chargers. And I think for me, like, the place that I wanted to start this conversation just in general was the safety class. I think, all three of us were kind of on board with the top of this safety class being Trayvon Merrick. Obviously you can include Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah there, but Trayvon Merrick, Richie Grant, Javon Holland, all three players that we really, really liked. And, I'm sitting there each night writing an article for LAFB, and I'm like, man, there's so many good safeties on their board. There's so many good safeties on the board on each night. And the safeties just kept on falling. Like, Trayvon Merrick was looked at as a round one lock. He ends up being the third safety off the board. So to me, that it just kind of shows that, maybe the NFL and the player and the front offices, they value things differently. And so the way that they valued this safety class, a bunch of them went in round 4 and 5, but the safety position at every single turn was falling down the board. And so that was a position that stuck out to me and something that really surprised me last weekend.
I will say that I don't know how this trend continues past this, but last year, and again, I didn't grade these players, but the first safety was taken at 36, all in the second round. So Xavier McKinney, Kyle Duggar, Grant Delpit, Antoine Winfield, these guys that I'm pretty sure at least like 3 or 2 of them were regarded as pretty good safety prospects. They fell. I don't know why they fell. I wasn't exactly in tune with that class. But I think this kind of, the biggest thing for me is the injuries. And that's part of why these guys fell. Not all of them, but the things that came out about players that we didn't know about. Didn't know Morrig had a back issue. Didn't know Owusu-Koramoah had a heart issue. Didn't know John Johnson had an arrest on his record. And so some of the things that pushed these guys back, didn't know about that. So I was surprised to see Holland going so early. But, connect that to my next point, just in general, these play, like, I don't know if you felt this way last year, but it feels like this year to me, again, this is the only class kind of that I've graded. It feels like more guys fell because of things that I didn't know about than previous years.
Right.
Like why is Jenkins falling? Oh, he has a hip. Why is Trey Smith falling? Oh, he has blood clots. Why are some of these guys falling? One guy, Weaver, had an eventual, like, he was arrested, like, not arrested, but he was like, they filed the charge the day he was, they were charged, the day that he was drafted. And so very, very kind of wild draft so far overall.
Yeah, I think that when you talk about the safeties, like, it's just, there was talk about Trevon Merrick maybe going in round 1, right? But then we figure out he has an injury, and then then you have 6 corners get drafted in round 1, right? So it feels like teams were pretty clear about valuing that premier kind of playmaker, even though safeties can kind of do a little bit of everything. Maybe teams just kind of valued that in this draft. But yeah, safeties definitely stuck out to me. Obviously the stuff Tyler was talking about, like, hey, this guy might fall, all that. I was honestly surprised when it came down to the first round in particular, just how little trade action there was. Because we saw a lot of talk about the Patriots trading up, a lot of talk about the Chargers trading up. And then, draft night comes and nothing really happened. I mean, the Eagles trade up and screwed the Giants, which was awesome. But other than that, nothing was kind of a big mover in the first round, other than teams trading back for guys that they knew they could get, something the Raiders maybe should have done. But, I was just surprised there was a little bit less action than previously anticipated. But maybe that's just kind of a traditional thing that happens in these classes. But I actually think that Arjun said in his video, the Chargers were like one of the only teams to not make a trade this entire draft, which is very, very Telesco-esque, kind of very conservative and all that. But I was definitely a little bit surprised by that. I was a little bit surprised just by how much information was coming out now, as opposed to last year when it felt like we kind of still knew everything before the draft because of the combine, because of all that. Like Brevin Jordan falling to round 6 or something like that. Like, I could not have predicted that before the draft. Like, I thought he was going 3rd round latest. Like that was sort of my opinion. And then, they talk about his poor athletic testing in combination with some other issues. Like, so that's something I was surprised by as well. Just not just the difference between so much the information we have, but also what the NFL's perception on these players was, particularly in the later rounds.
Did you see how many tight ends were drafted before Brevin Jordan?
No, I haven't.
There were 8 tight ends drafted before Brevin Jordan, including that one from Ohio State that was like the blocking tight end.
Luke Farrell?
Yeah, wow. Luke Farrell went before him, man. Like that was one of the surprises of the draft. I think, obviously, I'm an offensive line guy, and we kind of knew going in that all these NFL teams were kind of all over the map in terms of offensive tackle rankings, interior offensive line rankings. But to see Walker Little go at pick 45, like, I know that, Urban Meyer clearly had like a plan of drafting people that he recruited and had relationships with when they were high school juniors, which is just kind of a ridiculous way of going about the draft. But to see Walker Little and Jackson Carman go before Dylan Radunes and Creed Humphrey and Samuel Cosme, like, to me, that was a surprise. The way that the offensive line class in general panned out was just really surprising to me. Obviously, there's the Josh Myers thing, which I'm still just like shaking my head at. But the way in general, because like I don't think there was a single person that had Jackson Carman coming off the board at 46. And, we saw this thing from Duke Manyweather that teams were talking to Jackson Carman about playing tackle, and now the Bengals are going to play him at guard. And so it's like, really? They're going to play him at guard, and they're going to stick Riley Rife at right tackle. So the way the offensive line class in general just really, really surprised me. Again, Brendan Hymus falling to the 5th round when, he was kind of regarded as a top 12, 15 offensive tackle or swing option. That was a surprise as well, obviously.
There was also a lot of talk about like the opt-outs and the effect that would have, and
None.
sort of felt, yeah, it really
None.
felt like it had no effect for most of the draft, just because they got to watch these guys tape and still evaluate them based on that. Now, I do think there's part of it where like maybe a round 4 guy becomes like a round 6 or 7 guy based on like opting out, but didn't affect Caleb Farley. Obviously did not affect Rashawn Slater and Penei Sewell. Didn't affect a lot of the guys who went, in the first 3-4 rounds of the class. I do think maybe that something happened with like Kari Vincent, who was at one point like a 3rd, 4th round prospect, and then goes in round 7 because he opted out. So that's probably a thing. But yeah, I was a little bit surprised about how much the opt-outs didn't matter, just because of how old-fashioned NFL GMs are,
Right.
and how much they're like, I like that Jalen Waddle played on a broken ankle, and I don't like that the other guys didn't want to play in this COVID season that we made up. So I was a little bit surprised that old man mentality didn't actually end up affecting it quite as much as people thought it did.
Yeah, definitely. The other two, well, the plenty of things we can talk about, but the two I want to talk about are Gregory Rousseau and Jason Owe. I'm trying to look at where Gregory Rousseau went, but it was 30 something.
31.
31. No, so the Ravens took Owe at 31.
Oh.
So he must have gone like 30 then.
Yeah, Bills 30, yeah. Right? Yeah.
Bills, yeah.
So it's Peyton Turner at 28, Rousseau 30 to the Bills, Owe 31 to the Ravens, and then Joe Tryon to the Buccaneers at 32.
Yeah, Turner going early, Tryon kind of going early sort of makes sense. But man, Owe going that early and basically be considered, not that they're two different teams, sure, but Owe being basically considered the same as Rousseau is a little bit off to me. I certainly would have rather taken someone like Rousseau. Like about where Rousseau went is kind of like makes sense to me. He went like 30. I had him as like a 38th ranked player or something. So it's kind of like fair. A guy who has so many traits, had a lot of production, but not a lot of like on-field pass rush sort of moves. That kind of made sense to me. But Owe going that early, like Alex, I know you were kind of advocating for him, but certainly not at 31, right?
Yeah, no, not at 31. But I do think you see a team like the Ravens who is like, hey, this is our bread and butter. Like, we take these guys with high athletic skill sets and we're going to develop them. We don't care what anybody thinks about the pick. And we're just going to, go head on. Like, that's kind of what they do. And you see that run on edges. That was Turner, also Rosso, also Tryon, right? So like all those guys could go in that range to defensive, teams that are looking to kind of build their defense a little bit out, but obviously still have very good defenses as it is already. So I think they were like, hey, we can afford to take a chance. We're probably going to be in the playoffs next year anyway. And that's maybe how a team like the Ravens use Owe, or how a team like the Bills use Rosso for sure.
Yeah, the Ravens, man, like they're a winner like every single draft. Like the way that they draft, I know that they traded Orlando Brown, so they didn't really have a second round pick. But let me pull up their whole draft haul, because every time I look at the Ravens draft, I'm just like, man, these guys just know how to win the weekend. So they get obviously Rashad Bateman and Jason Owe, both, or Odafe Owe is his actual name, I guess. So then they get Ben Cleveland in round 3, Tylan Wallace, a receiver from Oklahoma State, who I really liked, in round 4, Shaun Wade in round 5, which not the huge fan of him, but that's good value. Dalen Hayes, the edge rusher from Notre Dame, and then Ben Mason, the fullback from Michigan. And like I look at all of those picks and I'm like, okay, like these guys are probably going to be really good for them and develop into some really good players. And I look at the way they attack the receiver position this year. You get a guy like Rashad Bateman who can separate over the middle. You get a guy like Tylan Wallace who can also separate, be a jump ball guy for Lamar Jackson. And I thought that they had a fantastic draft, kind of solving their issues like they always do.
Yeah, I mean, another team that I think was just super good at that same division is the Browns, where they just kind of retooled, reloaded, and now they have one of the best secondaries, I mean, in the league. And they also have Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney, right, coming at you. So that, I think, is just, I mean, kind of super insane to think about, that they're going to be even better than they were last year in this attempt to make a run at the Chiefs and make a run at the Bills. Like, I think they they put themselves, frankly, in that tier this weekend with all of the moves that they made. It's just crazy to see the haul that they got.
Yeah, Newsom, Owusu Koromoa, Schwartz, Hudson, like they were reading the minds of Chargers draft Twitter. Some of these guys, it's like
Tony Fields.
Tony Fields. Yeah, Tony Fields. What else from this draft stood out? I don't know. Like, I don't know. I'm glad that I called Nick Niemann in the 6th. Like that was
awesome.
Ironic selection.
That was awesome.
Aleem McNeil over Shelvin makes sense. Oh, I just want to talk about, we talked about this before the show, Stephen, but Cameron Bynum not being a 7th rounder, that never made sense to me. That's why he was my pick almost every single time I got to the 7th round, because it did not make sense to me. I understand not like as a 2nd round pick, but he ended up going in the 4th round or 3rd round. Yeah,
he went early in the 4th.
Yeah, that's just about right to me. So I'm happy he went a little bit earlier. Aaron Banks in the 2nd was a little odd to me. Like I understand that there's some good work there, and maybe like going in like the back end of the 2nd, but he went pretty early, right before the Chargers picked, maybe.
Yeah, he was the Niners. I think it was. I can pull it up, but it was like in the high 30s.
Mm-hmm. Definitely didn't think Trey Smith was going to go all the way as far as he did. It's kind of a shame. Like I still thought he would go back end of the 3rd round. He went late, and of course he goes to the Chiefs and joins Humphrey, so that is going to absolutely work out in their favor. The Cowboys taking Parsons completely makes sense for all the reasons. Yeah. De'Ami Brown at 82. Like he would, like Brentley Weissman on the show, or not on the show, but friend of the show, said, he could go, like he mocked Brown to the Chargers at 47. He went 82. That was a surprising fall to me as well.
Well,
I was just gonna say, when you talk about like all the injuries, like Trey Smith and stuff, I wonder, just not having the combine, not having all of that stuff, probably that made teams be like, yeah, like if this guy is, has this issue, he's just not on our board because we didn't get to meet him and we didn't get to do any of the stuff, and our only interaction with him, was on Zoom, right? So, for most of these teams and talking to guys. So I just feel like that was what made Trey Smith, a 3rd rounder to a 6th rounder, right? Or, made another guy fall, right? Because, if this was next year's draft where, hopefully we have a combine next year and hopefully it's a normal draft process. I don't know if that happens, because maybe a team feels more confident and it's like, yeah, I'll take Trey Smith in the 4th, right? Comparatively to what happened this year. So I think the lack of information that teams have, and it was funny to see people in the YouTube comments be like, you guys don't have the information that Telesco and Staley have. It's like, this is actually the least information that Tom Telesco has ever had going into a draft. Not just him, but all GMs in the NFL in general. So I think that having that little information and having that, cloud of uncertainty certainly changed a few picks.
So Tyler, to answer your question, Aaron Banks at 48th overall. So right after the Chargers took Asante Samuel Jr. Yep. Yeah, Cameron Bynum, everybody knows how I felt about him. I was a huge fan of his. I think he landed in a really good spot in Minnesota. They have such a good reputation of developing, defensive backs. And if he's able to kind of play that strong safety, nickel linebacker, I think that would be a good spot for him. So Tyler, any other thoughts before we wrap up today's show?
Just a quick thought. At this point now, it depends on where the players went. So I think Slater can have a better, not that the Chargers are really good at developing linemen, but I think he could probably have a better career than Sewell in Detroit. And I think that Surtain's probably in a better spot with Denver than Horn. And I had Sewell higher, I had Horn higher, but now it depends on where guys go. So when everyone pulls up our big boards from this past year in a year from now, remember that it's also about where they go. That's why Herbert won Rookie of the Year. Not that the coaching situation was all that great, but he had a lot of talent around him. So I'm really interested to see where these guys went and then how that plays into their development. And, whether we're right or wrong about these guys kind of based on their development. Yeah,
JC Horn to the Panthers was one of my least favorite landing spots.
Yeah.
It made no sense because they play so much zone coverage. And that's not what you're drafting JC Horn to do, man. So Horn to the Panthers, thank you, first of all. But also it just didn't make any other sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would just say the quarterbacks, right? All of that is just so much. Where do they end up? Is Justin Fields better off in Chicago than, Zach Wilson is in New York? I have no idea, because I do kind of trust Robert Saleh and the LaFleur brother over Matt Nagy at this point a little bit. So I don't know. Maybe that helps somebody like Zach Wilson, but also I do think Justin Fields obviously is more talented. And then, you know, it's kind of interesting. I was thinking about this the other day. People were kind of crushing the Broncos for not taking Justin Fields. And that's something that you can see in a year, 2 years from now, coming back to bite them in the ass. Obviously, Justin Fields is really good. But it got me thinking, if the Chargers had not taken Justin Herbert last year and they did take Jedrick Wills or Isaiah Simmons, what would our immediate draft grade have been, higher or lower?
So
if they took Isaiah Simmons or Jedrick Wills over Justin Herbert last year, well, I wasn't on the show, but would your guys' draft grade have been higher or lower than when they took Herbert?
I mean, I had a B plus, so I mean, to me, like, I liked that pick. It was the Joshua Kelly pick that really tanked that draft for me, and losing the picks, like, that tanked the draft for me. It could have been higher. Of course, it depends on what they do after that. But like if they take like Tristan Wirfs and got a freaking All Pro, you know, I even love, like, the grade probably would have been higher because they needed a tackle. He would have been a good tackle. It was a good prospect. Would it have been higher? I mean, I gave it a B plus last year, so I don't know what I really don't know.
I was just asking that to say, like, you know, we didn't like Herbert last year, and then a year goes by and we like Herbert now, right? Obviously, and we wouldn't have changed that for the world. So like the Broncos passing on on Fields will only come back to bite them in the ass if Fields is really good, right? And then, you know, that'll take place. But yeah, I was just thinking, like, immediately after the 2020 draft, if they took Simmons in comparison to if they took Herbert, I probably would have given it a slightly higher grade at the time. So yeah, it definitely is a factor of where these guys go, what weapons they have around them, especially when you're talking about the quarterbacks.
Yeah, I think I would have, you know, if they had gotten Jedrick Wills, I would have given them probably a higher grade, maybe a little bit. But, you know, the thing with taking a quarterback is that bumps up the value aspect of things. So the issue with the 2020 draft isn't who they took first, because I would have loved Jedrick Wills or Tristan Wirfs. The issue is what they did after that. So, which we've obviously seen now, you know, with, you know, Joshua Kelly being benched for Kalen Balazs and KJ Hill and Joe Reed not being able to see the field, and so we'll have to see if anything of those players changes. But you know, and the first round was not the problem for the Chargers last year; it was everything else that came after that. But yeah, and of course, if the Broncos end up trading Patrick Surtain for Aaron Rodgers, then I think that works out for them. But we'll have to cover that if there's anything else that happens. So, guys, thank you so much for tuning in today. As always, make sure and leave us a rating or review and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure, like I said, if you are watching us on YouTube, go check out the interview with Brendan Sonone. Some great content there. Can't thank him enough for joining us. And thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you guys next time.